All right, Robbie Jeanette here on The Curious Musician, welcoming a fantastic cello player, Jacob Szekely. Good to have you with us. How are you?
I'm great, Robbie. How are you?
I'm good. Great, actually. So, for those that don't know, Jacob has played on five of my albums and a couple of my live shows. All of that music will be coming out this fall, and I'm really excited because working with you had gotten my chart game to a place where I can actually write charts. I felt like it was some of the most helpful studio work that I had done, and I so appreciate your helping educate me, who came up basically self-taught. And so I want to dig in a little bit to what made you who you are. For people that don't know you, what would you say you are most recognized for in your world?
Wow. So I am a band leader, a composer, an improvising cellist.
Rare?
Very rare. I really have sort of devoted my life to pushing what I like to call creative cello playing forward. So that means with my the teaching I do, with my performing, with the way I use electronics at times, with my approach to improvising and kind of expanding the possibilities of the instrument.
Yep.
I'd say that's sort of the main tie-in for all of my work, and it's led me to some interesting places.
Now, cello, being an instrument most people associate with classical, you got into the world of improvisation, which is not often taught in the classical world. And I want to get into a little bit of that. So, bring me back to you as a child. What was your exposure to classical music or other kinds of music when you were very young?
Well, I grew up in a European Jewish immigrant household, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York. And I think the musical selection in the house was fairly typical of that kind of cultural background. So the emphasis was definitely on European music and Jewish music as well. So my father listened to, there was plenty of classical music in the house. There was a bit of jazz, and there was also a good smattering of Broadway and show tunes. Although I will say that when I was, I think, 11 or 12 years old, my dad, who again, grew up in communist Hungary and had a very, not a huge exposure to uh, non-classical music
Right?
as a kid, I remember he discovered Jimi Hendrix. And this
Wow.
is when I was about 12. So this is pretty late in the game for my dad. But I remember somehow he got a hold of this, and I'm not sure exactly what got him there, but he got this double cassette, and it had Machine Gun, and I think the one side of it was Band of Gypsies, and the other side of it was live. It was one of those long play cassettes,
Yep.
and I remember my dad would listen to that over and over again, like while he would be painting. And of course, his studio was right next to my room. My dad was a painter. So another aspect of that was that even though I think the musical genres were fairly limited, there was a really high emphasis on, being a painter and an artist, on curiosity and innovation. Like
Hmm.
those had very, very high value for my dad, and the way he would teach me or even talk about great artists. It was always, what was that person's innovation? How did they change art, for example, or painting or architecture? And I think that value system stuck with me.
What kind of stuff was he into as a painter, and did he take you to museums to see art?
Oh yes, quite a bit. He was, I would call his work abstract expressionist.
Okay.
But there is also, especially, in maybe the last 20 years of his work, there's something almost um, eh, even more childlike about the work, like really trying to go back to, there's something almost Basquiat-ish or whatever, where there's this almost primitivism happening. Um, and and that ties into what he did in his teaching. So he taught at the College of Fine Art, and he taught painting, but he also taught, I guess at that time they were kind of connected, art education. And so as an art educator, he spent basically his entire career trying to help people not teach the creativity out of their children. That was
Love
his
that.
big thing. Yeah, yeah, kind of following in with that, Picasso thing. Picasso would say that, every with a child, every line is amazing, every,
Right.
and it's our sort of self-consciousness that, kind of inhibits us later in life.
And that attitude must have impacted you greatly as a musician, because So when you were coming up as a musician, what was your first instrument? It's not, I assuming maybe a cello wasn't put into your hands at a young age, but did you have access to a piano or anything?
Yeah. So I did take some piano lessons, but in my family, I had an older sister and a younger sister. And so the older sister got the violin, I got the cello, the younger sister got the viola. So this was kind of preordained. And so, yeah, I had a very small cello. And yeah, that I had a cello from, 4 years old or so.
Wow. So were you interested in it, or did it take you time to get interested in it?
It takes you time. The cello is not an instant gratification instrument. Really, none of the bowed strings are, and of course, none of the orchestral instruments really are. But to the extent that you can start at a very young age on bowed strings, whereas for winds you have to develop your chops, and it's
Sure.
hard to start as young. You can't really even draw a beautiful sound on the cello for a few years after you start. So the amount of investment it takes, it's kind of like anything else. By the time you're old enough to be good at it, it's usually too late to start. And so that's the paradox. So you have to have parents who are kind of a certain personality type. So yeah, that I was not super into it, although my teachers did notice that I had a really good ear. And I remember that I was advancing a lot more quickly than my older sister, and I could learn things by ear pretty easily.
Interesting. Do you know where that came from, or was it just something that was innate in your listening skills?
I think most of that stuff is always innate. A lot of people feel like you can develop these things, and I think that's true to a certain extent. But the sad truth of it is like any aptitude, I think if you're going to be really elite at something, you got to have just the luck of the draw genetically. And
Sure.
I should say I don't have perfect pitch, but my relative pitch was quite good. And yeah, I find it's this way with children too. Like with my kids, my oldest kid just doesn't really have that aptitude.
Right.
So I mean, you can push that rock, but only so far.
Right.
It's like you can practice basketball, but if you don't have the right genetics, you're probably not going to be a Division I player or playing
Right.
in the NBA or something.
So talk me through, you're playing cello from 4, you're taking a couple of years to get a nice tone out of it and whatnot. What was the first piece of music or composer that really spoke to you, that made you feel like, what, this is something, this is a path for me? What was the first thing that either that you played or that you heard that made you more interested to dig in?
Right. Yeah. So I think all musicians have those, maybe 2 or 3 of those memories where like, aha, that was my aha moment, right?
Right.
That was like a turning point for me. So yeah, I definitely have those. So as far as listening to music, I remember a recording of Lynn Harrell playing the Saint-Saëns cello concerto. And obviously when you're a kid, there's this huge dichotomy between the music you're working on, basically the music you're able to play,
Yeah.
which is extremely rudimentary and frankly pretty uninspiring.
Right?
And that moment when you hear a recording and you hear the possibilities,
Yes.
and it totally, so that was a huge one for me. So it was Lynn Harrell with Sir Neville Marriner and the London Symphony Orchestra.
Mm.
And yeah, that was a huge one for me. The Saint-Saëns, to me, the A minor cello concerto, represented. It was like everything the cello could be like emotionally. And then I remember later when I was about 13, I felt like maybe I was finally ready to play that.
Hmm.
And I was at this summer camp, and I fell in love with this girl for the first time, and she was older, and then she ran off with like an older guy who was like way better cellist than I was, and I just sat in my room all summer playing that brooding Sturm und Drang kind of minor key, like just soul stirring piece. And I remember, like, man, I learned the heck out of it. Everyone was shocked. I mean, I was just spent 10 hours a day, and I just felt like just completely connected to the muse. And yeah, so that probably started when I heard that for the first time, that recording, I think when I was like 5 or
Wow.
6, and I wore that out. That was really cool. But
That's
for
awesome.
me, the first time live, this was the biggest one, was I was, I want to say 7.5 or 8. And I was at this like festival and my parents had moved us to Lexington, Kentucky at that point.
Okay.
And we were at a church downtown, and I played with my little group, and then an older group played, and an older group played. And then the last group that played was a group of 4 college cellists from the University of Kentucky. And the cellist was directing them or whatever. And they
Yeah.
just played like just sort of some of the greatest hits of the cello, an arrangement of the Swan or
Okay.
Rachmaninoff's Vocalese, things you would hear on a, cello for a sleepy time kind of Spotify mix, right?
Gotcha.
But that church had incredible acoustics, and being there live, sort of experiencing that, right? Because in Lexington, there weren't a lot of great, concerts to go to. It didn't have the
Yeah.
same, cultural that Brooklyn did.
Yeah.
There was something about that where all of the seeds that my teachers and the music I listened to and planted, it just, I was just drunk on the sound. And I
Awesome.
remember walking out, and I looked up at my mom and I said, I'm going to do that. And I really I can still remember like looking up at my mom, and that was it for me. I don't think I ever considered really doing anything else after that.
That's incredible. And you, I've known you obviously in your adult life. To me, you're a historian because you're not just an educator. You know so much about classical. So I can only imagine from those early days to now, the amount of exposure, not just that you got from your schooling, but that you gave to yourself autodidactically to just accumulate that knowledge out of that. Again, this is called the curious musician for a reason. I think curiosity is the main driver of success. It's the main driver past all the walls, barriers, limits, ceilings that you get to. It's what keeps you driven. So, you go into your teenage years, and now you're getting serious as a musician, I'm assuming. What was your education and your live music exposure in and out of classical at that point as you were moving into and out of your teenage years?
Well, when I was getting toward the end of my middle school education, again in Lexington, Kentucky at that point, I was spending my summers going to music festivals already, as kids, musical kids do.
Right?
And I was practicing quite a lot already, maybe 3-4 hours a day by the time I was 10 or 11. And I realized that there was going to be a ceiling for me in Lexington.
Yeah.
Now, it's actually really ironic because there are some really incredible musicians that are slightly older than me, but who came from my town and who I knew at that time, who have massive careers now. The principal, or the concertmaster of the Boston Symphony, who was assistant principal, Nathan Cole, he would take lessons right across the hall from me at UK with Dan Mason, the violin teacher, or Zach Brock, who I consider to be the best jazz violinist in the world. He went to Tate's Creek, the high school across the way from me, and he was friends with my sister, my older sister. So a lot of great musicians
Yeah.
came from my little town. But I decided to go to high school in a place called Interlochen, which is in
Yeah.
northern Michigan. And that was a place that was founded, I think, in the 30s or the 20s. And it was a place for musically inclined kids. So
Right.
Van Cliburn had went there, Peter Erskine, the drummer, a lot of famous violinists, Bill Prusel, who was the concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra. Many, I think Jesse Norman went there, many great musicians. But it gave me a chance to get up in the morning and have my first 2 hours of the day be orchestra. Then my next class was chamber music. Then my next class was theory. And I had to take one academic, I think, or two academics. And it was very much like starting college,
Yeah.
which was really cool. And at that time, I started to really get exposed to jazz and jazz musicians
Yeah.
in a way that I couldn't have been in Kentucky. You know, when you're sharing
Yeah.
dorm rooms with people and, you know, people are coming in and out and you're getting to play with people who
Yeah.
you wouldn't have. So it was that kind of cross-pollination phase for me. I got to experience that a lot earlier than I think I would have if I would have stayed in, you know, my town and waited for college.
Do you think that, so obviously at Interlochen you have that cross pollination, like you said, but I feel like so many musicians that are in the classical world don't either have the mindset or the desire to dip their foot into the jazz and improvisational
Yeah.
world. So, A, were you kind of alone in that pursuit? And B, I'm curious what the first jazz music artists and albums were that kind of took your ear and went, you know, I could kind of see myself doing this.
Yeah. So I had a best friend who was a trombone player, and my roommate was a double bass player, Dan, who I'm still close to this day. He actually lives in LA, which is awesome. And I remember there were a couple of recordings. Tim brought in a recording of Lush Life. John Coltrane, obviously, the Impulse recording. And that got me really, really interested in Coltrane. I think the next few weeks, I spent a tremendous amount of time listening to Coltrane. I also had a clarinetist roommate a different year who was like a huge Brahms fan. And so I was getting a lot of, but going back to jazz, then Dan was really interested in Cannonball Adderley's stuff. Both with Miles and after. And so I was really taking in a lot of that. So I think it started with, you know, bop and post bop. And then I think I remember my junior year, I started to listen to fusion music and, you know, I heard Bitches Brew for the first time and, you know, a lot of Herbie's stuff from the 70s. That was really important to me too, from a jazz perspective. And what I did was you know, Interlochen had a jazz program and we had a great jazz teacher, Mr. Sears, who very reluctantly let me take his jazz improv courses, like with the horn players and the piano players. And also promised me he would let me join the jazz band if I excelled enough, but refused when the time came, but he let me form my own combo. And so, yeah, I was kind of a weirdo there. But again, I think I started to formulate this question of, you know, because when you hear these different horn players that had such distinct sounds. I was also a big Johnny Hodges fan. Just because his playing seemed so cellistic to me, like his tone and his phrasing. It was so, I want to say vocal, but when I think of vocal, I think of the cello, I guess. But I remember transcribing some of his solos, and I was like, man, why is it that my friend Dan, who plays the bass, and my friend Tim, who plays the trombone, they have this voice and they can sing, they can be in jazz band and
Right.
sing a jazz piece. They can be in orchestra and sing a classical song.
Right.
They can, be in a rock group or a fusion group and use their voice in that way.
Yeah.
But as a cellist, like, why am I not allowed to do that? And so it's like,
yeah, like why was your teacher so reluctant to allow you into jazz just simply because you weren't on like the correct instrument,
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, I remember having fights with Mr. Sears, and he was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to put you on a trombone part, or am I going to put like, with the big band or whatever? And I was like, man, like, let's figure it out. I can play a trombone part, but it was really, I think he was just concerned. Well, he was a very traditional guy. I remember he even had his wife call him Mr. Sears, and he called her Mrs. Sears.
Okay.
So this is a guy who might be a little nervous about, throwing a cello into the
right.
And I think times have changed, and I think there are, obviously that was a, every educator has their own ideas and their own aesthetic about it. But
it's interesting because I taught at Musicians Institute for about 8 years or so, and in open counseling, I would teach a lot of Asian students that came out of classical and came over to Musicians Institute to learn the rest of music. Right. And they, almost to every single one, they would play anything off of the sheet like amazing. But when you took it away, they were sitting in front of a piece of furniture and they had been denied their own voice. And that galled me and still does, because I feel like in a pursuit of perfection or developing a voice at playing something that already exists, we eschew teaching people how to develop their own voice. So you as an improviser and you fighting to get into the jazz and get into that, we're fighting for something that a lot of them don't even realize they're missing until way later, if at all, their own thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's really a cultural barrier there because, well, there's a cultural barrier, almost a double cultural barrier, because there's my older sister studies educational policy, and she's a incredible educator herself, following in my family's footsteps. And
love it.
She will study, the education system in Finland and whatever versus Asia,
right.
The successful systems in like the Hong Kong or the Singaporeans or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's just there's a difference in what they value, specifically innovation.
Right.
The Europeans value innovation the same way my dad did, who was European. Obviously, I'm from that school, right? So now in Asia, it's a lot more about drilling,
right,
and rote, and execution more than innovation. I feel like there's a reason why the classical music culture, not just classical music itself, because obviously Japanese people love jazz. It's not like a aesthetic thing, but it's the culture around the conservatory model, I think, really appeals to and transfers beautifully well to, if you look at just how Asians approach education in general from a value standpoint and a technical standpoint. Now, there's also obviously a cultural thing because of that. Like if you think about like the conservatory system, I think something really weird happened. And in my asking that question that we talked about earlier, why aren't we encouraged to, wasn't Beethoven a great improviser? Wasn't Mozart, improvising and arranging as
Liszt and Chopin? Yeah, they were all great.
Exactly. Yeah. Or what about it? You can go even further down the line, with fiddle players, Fritz Kreisler or Paganini, right? Any of these guys, right?
Right.
Even Pablo Casals, you can go right up to this point. And I, in my own sort of, historian lens, through my own historian lens, I realized that it was around the turn of the last century that something really fundamental shifted. And I'm not 100% sure why, but I think it might have something to do with the advent of the recording itself.
Yes.
Right? Because once you start getting these wax cylinders, what happened in my world is that you can listen to the first wax cylinder recordings and, the earliest kind of transfers. And I used to love listening to, like violinists like Joseph Szigeti or some of the earliest guys who really represented different schools of violin playing or cello playing. Guys who were playing on like silk E strings in some cases, and like really, really old school, and or Fritz Kreisler or whatever, or Pablo Casals. These guys had such fundamentally different approaches to how the instrument should sound. We're not even going to talk about interpretation, because some of the things these guys were doing interpretively were so unique and so distinctive. And, we still have a few players like that today. But with the advent of the recording, and you can listen decade by decade, things become more universal, more homogenized. The approach to everything, from the approach to vibrato and tone production, phrasing, to just overall like the interpretations of pieces. Again, there are a few rebels still today, I'll grant you, but for the most part, if you're going to win a competition and kind of go a standard route, you need to play the things a certain way. I think competition culture too maybe encouraged this. But now I think the conservatory adapted and the training adapted in such a way where people just didn't have time to, I think, even think about improvisation and self-expression. It became more about, just an ever-increasing arc of just excellence, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, the chops on someone doing the Queen Elizabeth competition today on the cello, I mean, none of the greatest soloists on earth 30 years ago could ever win the Queen Elizabeth. I will probably be struck down by lightning for saying this. But it's like watching an Olympic sprinter 30 years ago versus now.
Yeah.
There's just, they couldn't even make it in the field, right? And not to put down anyone or whatever, obviously not. But because of that ever increasing slope and the training and, the push to, I feel like, and the advent of the recording, I think those two things led to a change in culture where all of a sudden the conservatory system completely dropped any of these ideas of self-expression, improvisation, composition. The theory class itself became a place where, I used to ask, why would I never bring my cello into theory class?
Right.
Because I did take it into the jazz improv classes, which were definitely a mix of theory.
Yeah.
You learn about, the modes of the melodic minor scale, but immediately as you were doing that, the rhythm section would play it and you play the scale against to hear the sound and, fuck around with it and turn into, very similar to, I'm sure, how, you studied or rock guys learn. But that was like a revelation to me coming from classical thing. I was never encouraged to bring my instrument into the classroom. Are you kidding me? That's just not how things are done.
So you bring up a really interesting point, and I think this is something that people really don't consider, is when there was a time when the only way you could record was on paper, notation. And the only way that you could bring music to life was reading the notation. There was no recording. There was no nothing. If you heard somebody in person, that was, maybe once. When you have only that system, people can hear and visualize on paper in a way that once you have an ability to record, I feel like you lose it. If you're locked into a cabin with nothing but note paper, notation paper, maybe you could kind of get back in that mindset. But it's interesting how once we had the ability to record, we kind of fundamentally lost the, we were talking about that the other time, where are our modern composers? Where are the people who are composing on the level of what seemed to be a lot of people back then and not as many people now? And I think we also have, when at the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s, you had ragtime come in and you had songs made of chords.
Yep.
You had music that was transposable. And any song made of chords you can transpose from key to key, whereas classical, the key is written into the title, Nobody's going to transpose a Rachmaninoff symphony,
Right, and it's so idiomatic. The composer, this is part of the art of orchestration.
100%.
Whether it's solo,
So, and people still bought, millions of copies of sheet music for songs back in the day. But I think once you got to ragtime and then those early standards and Gershwin and Irving Berlin and whatnot, that was what changed. And I think recording became somewhat of a crutch in a way, where you can so easily record it, go back, transfer it. Nowadays, you put your MIDI, you could do it in a way that it seems like an easier lift, but then are we not composing on that level anymore because we've all taken the easy way, you know?
I think that's a really good point. It's that whole Emersonian thing, right? In self-reliance, which we did talk about the other day.
Yeah.
He was like, society never really improves. We just move in waves, right? The modern man has his stagecoach, but he can't walk without getting tired. The modern farmer has his almanac, but he's lost the ability to just look up at the stars and know the season or the time of day, sun.
Right.
I think that's such a powerful idea, Robbie. And, as I know we both have kids and, it's like, why do I not want them to use Spotify or look at screens or whatever? I think as a musician, it would be really interesting to have this, now we're ever evolving. Now I think there's this whole other kind of musician, like the YouTube creature.
Right.
Who's, even in their artistry or whatever, thinking in 1 minute kind of sound bites or, prompts or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it would really be interesting. I mean, I'm very aware with my kids how, the medium terraforms the brain. Of course, it's different to read from a tablet.
Yep.
Than to read from a book, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's different to dictate to ChatGPT versus writing out your thoughts. There's no comparison. And I think you're right. There's a tremendous amount that has been lost. Like, I find myself going back to paper or at least writing on a tablet as opposed to quite often for most of my ideas. It's like I when I'm composing. And yeah, it really is a fundamentally different way to use the brain. And I think you're right. It would be great to see in conservatory, like there should be a movement to, get rid of the
screens.
Computers. Yeah. At least for a semester or two. You know what I mean? Like understand that difference, and even as a tool for creativity, right?
Right.
Like, it's like, I'm going to just create something. It's like when I write something on the cello, it's different from the piano. Like, I'm just going to use paper. I think that's really powerful.
There's something to that. And, look, music's going to change. Music's going to evolve. Technology is going to change and evolve music on all these levels. I mean, to be able to walk around with every song ever recorded on a device in our pocket is, for musicians, it's unbelievable, while at the same time, nobody can make any money anymore. Right. So it's like we have this like twofold problem where some things got way better and some things got way worse. The access.
I think there's an illusion of abundance too, right? Because if you have everything on your computer, that's great, but what does any of it mean?
Well, the illusion of abundance comes from the lack of curation. And without trusted curation, it used to be we had radio DJs, FM DJs that would curate stuff, or we had, now you have Spotify playlists, but a lot of times they're algorithmically curated. So when you trust somebody, I'm sure you, like me, have watched a lot of YouTube videos, and there'll be somebody talking about an artist or a record or a recording or an instrument. And it's interesting. You get, like, hopefully this conversation turns a lot of people on to different ideas, different music to listen to, different ways to think about music. And I think that's the important thing that pushes against the technological tide and lets people know, hey, there's people out here who are not using AI to create music. When the power goes out, my piano works and your cello works.
That's right.
That's
right.
So in a lot of times in interviews, people ask about AI and music. And I don't think that's something that necessarily you or I are utilizing musically. So I want to do the opposite. How in this age of AI and creation do we help to give people the idea that making music just with your hands and your mind is actually the fun and real way to go when they could just push buttons?
We're talking about people who create music or people who consume music?
People who create music, because if you heard, there's one guy who was interviewed. He's like, people don't. It's too much hard work. People don't need to do that. They just want to give a prompt and get some music out. And like that, I love the hard work. I love working at something. I love struggling with a piece that I'm working on or a part that I'm working on, because that's part of my evolution. And I don't want to shortcut that. I don't want to shortcut my voice. I don't want to shortcut my talents. And if, anybody that's using AI to write their lyrics or to write their music, you're creating product, not art. And I make that distinction because art has to come from the artists. I've heard great AI created songs, funk songs of metal tunes and all sorts of stuff that is really fun. But ultimately, if it's ever going to jump off your computer and on a stage, people are going to play it. You know?
Right. I think there's this whole thing about the commoditization of art and of music. So if your goal is, one of the great promises of AI, of any technology, is to reduce drudgery.
Sure.
Right? Like we like as a society the fact that AI will speed up boring tasks,
right?
You know, boring office work or even maybe research, right? To
sure.
get us to something.
Yeah.
But the idea of speeding up something that we inherently value or taking the work or the process out of something that we inherently value, that is inherently valuable, I would argue, is just a completely different thing, isn't it? It's like, so when someone says, why do the work, like in your example, I would say that about, you know, say my, you know, cleaning out my email box or, you know, or whatever. It's like, why do the work? Yes, I'd rather have an agent do that for me or some AI thing. But so why go through the, you know, spiritual process of evolving or discovering something as an artist, you know, is almost like asking, you know, why meditate? I can just get an AI to, you know, summarize the Lotus Sutra. I don't know. It's so, but again, if we're thinking about AI, the ends of creating music to be to sell something, which
product
really for the product thing, then I guess that makes sense.
But to create art isn't always to make something as a commodity. So much art is created for the personal expression, for the catharsis, not knowing if it's going to find a place. I mean, you've played on my music. I don't cleanly fit in any one place, but that hasn't stopped me from pursuing what I do to the highest ideal. And I love seeing people who just are creating. And we go back to Hendrix. I mean, what Hendrix was doing at the time he was doing it was so far beyond what anybody who picked up a guitar would do. And sure, he had psychedelics in his system and whatnot, but he also had a freedom in his mind of it. It doesn't matter what the trend is out there. It doesn't matter what's happening. It matters what I'm expressing. And I go back to Bowie a lot. If people don't get it, maybe the next thing. And the next thing after that, because I'm going to keep pushing and evolving. And Miles was a great example of that too. You know, he didn't care if he lost audience. He cared that he was interested. And he cared that it was something that he could chew on. And then when he was bored with that, he went to the next. And he would pull in, you know, when you first heard Bitches Brew, you may have liked it. You may have thought, what is this crap? But once you kind of understand it a little more, you go, okay, you know, this guy who was doing Kind of Blue in 59, doing this is like the evolution of it all. Even if you don't like Bitches Brew, should be like an illumination. Like, what can I evolve myself into?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's hard to take ourselves back to just being listeners, like when we first heard music that touched us and what it was about it. And to me, obviously, the truth of what someone is doing, the authenticity, which is, I think, what you're describing, which is the process. Like there's no, that is the spark, right? That's the candle that lights up all the other candles in the room. Like when somebody channels that, you know it's just there. Like I had this talk actually with Getty. I remember we were at this really fancy restaurant in, I think it was Saskatchewan or something. And, you know, they took us back and, you know, the private room or whatever. And at that point we'd been, you know, the tour had been going on for a while. Getty is the bassist from Rush, in case you guys don't know this, Geddy Lee. And going into that tour, I'd been doing a lot of session work and working and really polishing a lot of turds, you know, making a living, playing music that clearly was designed to be a product. In my mind, like clearly lacked that self-discovery and kind of that genuine, authentic thing. Makes
commercial product.
We can't, And if you do enough of that, and if that balance is off, one can become a little bit cynical.
Sure.
Right. And I was asking Getty, I was like, man, so, we started playing, and we'd spent at that point a couple of months, night after night. And I didn't grow up. I didn't know Rush's music growing up, but
Interesting.
The authenticity of what they were doing, like the fact that these guys were playing sold out arenas,
Yep.
and delivering what was clearly a religious transcendent experience, playing, music that was clearly, I mean, not only, sophisticated and beautiful and interesting and not commercial in the sense that I would think of commercial,
Right.
Not a product, but something that was so authentic and personal, and yet, selling out arenas and doing all of this. I was like, man, this is really kind of helping me to reconnect with. And I was like, how are you guys doing this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And still creating something that was, and I don't remember Geddy's exact answer, but it really spoke to kind of what we were saying, that you can't, of course, we'd all like to make a living and be rich and famous and have six-pack abs even. But at the end of the day, if you are worried about that at all, you're not creating you're creating product.
Right.
Basically. If you're worried about how that end thing is going to be received. And again, this is simple, but it's not easy to do. I mean, we all need to make a living and do all this stuff. But that really, it seems to be, that was, the attitude of, Geddy and Neil and Alex.
Well, they wrote their own ticket. I mean, after Caressive Steel, their third album, the label was said basically, you need to deliver a radio song or we're done. And they went into the studio and did an album side 2112 conceptual dystopian, that became the biggest thing ever. It's actually one of the greatest examples of doubling down into what you truly want to do winds up being the ticket to being able to do anything you want to do. And then you look at how they evolved through, Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, and then Permanent Waves, and then bringing in the synths and moving pictures and signals. And, to evolve your music in a way where you become more of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's rare.
Yeah, it's also a courageous thing, right? Because most bands, after their first thing, when you do that, you risk alienating your audience, right? So again, the minute you're thinking about, and there is like an incredible, it's almost like a stubbornness, right? To be able to do that is, it's just incredibly rare. Sometimes in LA, you see it, there'll be someone and you're like, wow, how did that person make it?
Yeah.
Right? They don't seem to be but it's because they have this incredible stubbornness to not care about what they don't know or what they don't, and they're doing their thing. They're doing their thing. And to me, we all talk about one can be kind of self-congratulatory, like as an artist, like, you see like the Oscars and you have all these pompous, in my opinion, just ridiculous people congratulating them and using words like courage and everything when they're millionaires and they're, virtue signaling. But I do think genuinely that there is a courage to committing to this process of discovery, and like what, you get to a point where you start to say, what do I sound like?
Yeah.
Like for whoever that is, and the courage to pursue that and what it takes to continue to go down that rabbit hole is pretty extraordinary, I think.
I think a lot of artists think that in order to find your sound, you have to find it at first and then continue to expand that sound. But the more different kinds of music you try out, the more you find your sound. Because if I do something that's reggae inflected or rock inflected or punk or classical or whatever it is, it's going to come out like my version of it, and you'll see more of my personality in that rather than if I wrote the same piano-based song over and over again, Right.
Yeah, totally. And that's, people ask me something I've thought of, with my students is they'll say, well, what is the process of finding your own voice? And from a teacher perspective, I advocate the same thing. I say, think about your passion as like a divining rod, right? It's never going to lead you astray.
Right.
So when you're transcribing, which is a really important part of, and like you said, it can be a reggae song, it can be a punk song. Don't limit yourself.
Right.
But the question of what should I work on, what should I transcribe, what should I that's going to lead me down this authentic process, it's always about your passion, right? So when you hear something, it can't be, oh, I think I should be working on that, or oh, my teachers, or oh, it's got to be, wait a minute, those 10 seconds of music made me feel a certain way, right? Maybe you feel it in your gut, you know, like your first kiss or whatever. It makes your palms sweat, your heart beats a little faster, whatever it is. You can't ignore that. You have to follow that all the way down. And what happens, like you're saying, is that it may be it'll be someone else's lick or song or riff initially.
Yep.
Once you start to explore that and you connect and you collect enough of those, no person on earth would have chosen the same ones that your passion led you to.
Right.
And over time, that's sort of what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again simple, but not easy to do, right? We all have this culture of, you know, in classical music, our teachers tend to destroy us emotionally and break us down. It's like the whole whiplash kind of approach.
Right.
And I had many teachers like that. And so I realized that most classical players, because we're all playing the same music as everyone else, and we're competing on it and doing this, and whether you're in Paris or some kid in Iowa in music school, you're playing the same stuff. It's almost like you have these ghosts, you know, when you try to break out of that and do something sort of creative where it's like, oh, wait a minute, can you still play all 40 Popper etudes? And what about your concertos? You'll see a recording of some 6-year-old Korean prodigy. And it takes you down this back to the ego thing, right? Back to the ghosts of all those teachers saying, you're not legit. I think jazz musicians have this too, right? If you can't play rhythm changes and giant steps at quarter note equals 500, but nobody stops to think, wait a minute. Did anyone ever ask Coltrane, hey, can you play country music too and rock and play every style? Fuck no, right? It was just about we want you to sound like John Coltrane because you're John Coltrane. But we lose, I think, the whole educational process, and you just lose track of that. Well, and so fighting those ghosts is a big part of just, you know, again, simple but not easy.
And also genres, like, you know, classical is a genre, jazz is a genre. I've talked with other people about some genres are narrow to create the genre. Reggae is narrow. If you get too far outside of reggae, you're reggae influenced. You know, blues is narrow. I would say country music is narrow, but rock and jazz have these giant umbrellas. Now, classical has a pretty large umbrella too for what's been before, but we talked about like who's expanding that umbrella nowadays. You know, there's so much of returning to form, you know, of the old and who can play it the best or with the most passion or whatnot. That those competitions in classical, you don't have the same kind of competitions where everybody's playing the same, you know, rock piece or blues piece. You know what I mean? So to get any young musicians out there who might be listening to this into the idea of being on that exploration of your own self-discovery, not limiting yourself, not saying, hey, I'm only this kind of musician, being able to open yourself up. And as difficult as it was for you to become a jazz improv cellist because of the reluctance of people to actually let you into that, what a path it's led you to by simply following it because your gut said, this feels good, this feels right, I want to do this. I don't even know if there's a place for this in the world. And you found multiple places and wound up on stage with frickin' Rush.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, it's true. There's great reward.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have to be willing to, as I said, you have to know that you're going to be battling those ghosts and that,
bring them on.
Yeah, and that there's this thing of it's very easy to start worrying about your product.
Yes.
Like you said. And I think YouTube and the culture of Instagram and whatever, obviously it's a huge thing with guitarists and of course cello, it's the same, every instrument.
Right.
There's this weird thing of I think this really exacerbates or makes it difficult to think about I think that can really cloud the process as well, especially for a lot of young people growing up where that's kind of their world.
Yeah.
They think that's what music is. Just like kids who grow up. I saw this stat I can't remember, maybe it was in the New York Times or something, where some ridiculous percentage of kids growing up as the job they aspire to now is influencer.
Right.
I think there's a musical equivalent to that. And
Sure.
without this being the, get off my lawn kind of
No, no, no.
kind of thing, I think that's really tricky too, because again, it makes you think about it pushes people into this product thing. And I
Yeah.
think that's
It's
pretty dangerous.
it is a dangerous mindset, while at the same time we have to recognize this is kind of I don't want to say the marketplace, but this is the paradigm. And if you and I were 15 years old and opening up our YouTube or Instagram channel and trying stuff out, we would have the same mentality. Oh, I should put some clips up. I should show people what I do. Whereas the same, you can't imagine Pablo Casals even worrying 1 minute about, or Jimi Hendrix, like, what are my numbers today? Like, they just were in a creative mode. So I want to always tell younger musicians out there and younger artists that to find your own path is the greatest thing, to not care about what other people think, which is hard for people, to relinquish your ego and serve the music. So much of that is not innate unless you are around older musicians. I would always gravitate towards, going to blues jams or wherever to play with people and just pick stuff up. Playing with people who are better than you, and me working with you who are far more educated than I, is the only way that you really can grow. And your ego, if you're like, oh, I can't, no, they're too, if your ego stops you, you have to remove your ego, not stop.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me ask you, without fishing for compliments, we've done 5 albums together where you came in and I was still getting my chart game in order. But on this orchestrated progressive rock music that I create, do you have any comments on like the composition of it? Because I don't come from a classical place, but as I worked with you and worked on these parts and wrote these charts, like, I don't know what it sounds like or where it comes from. I'm just following my muse. And for me, it's like building an exoskeleton on the harmonic structure of the piano bass drums that I'm used to in a way that guitar wouldn't be there, because, you have a viola, a violin, and a cello melody working around everything, and it all has to fit. I was just curious if you had any thoughts on the copious amounts of work we've just done.
Oh man, I will. First of all, I really enjoyed the shit out of it. I loved, I love the music you write. I feel like the two, and definitely your orchestration chops and your ideas evolved a lot.
Yeah.
It was really fun swapping. You sending me stuff that you were listening to.
Yeah.
That was inspiring you harmonically or orchestrationally, and me sending back things to you, sending,
Yep.
Ravel or Debussy or,
Yeah.
whatever we were talking about. I think Frank Martin's Mass, maybe we talked about it.
Yes. Yes.
Which is fucking incredible music. And yeah, just seeing how you weave that into your language. You're right. It's such a different thing to use strings, because you really wanted to do something where you were integrating the strings in a way where we were, much more than just a background part. You were really trying to go for a real like partnership of the instrument. That's a very hard thing, and a lot more rare to pull off in progressive rock or rock music in general. Obviously, there are some famous arrangements that we all know.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to do. You have to think about the balance between the strings and the instruments, the crosstalk, and there's just a lot of artistry involved. So I feel like it was awesome being part of your process and seeing how you started to integrate new ideas and new concepts as we went along.
Yeah.
And some of it was really fucking hard to play, but I still loved it.
It was hard, at first I'd write something and, you'd be like, well, no, that's actually too low for the range of the instrument. Oh, okay, let me just work on that. And I loved the challenge of it because once I got the idea, okay, I'm doing rock music with no guitars, but strings, not in place of guitar, playing what guitars would play, but in place of the role.
Right.
Right. And so once I got that idea with my EP Gleams that I had done when I worked with Fernando Perdomo, doing this and saying to myself, all right, I want to write these parts, which is not usual. One of the things that we do as musicians, I'm sure, is find inspiration. So I got really into people like Don Sebesky. And different arrangers. And I started to, along this process, 8 years we've been working on this, is seek out arrangers and seek out people to listen to and seek out movie soundtracks and really put things on in my realm, not to sit and learn it or transcribe it or anything, but just to soak up some of the sensibilities in ways, just for what it was worth,
Right.
And I love doing that because for me, this is, I don't know where this is going to lead to, but I love composing and arranging for strings and horns now, and being able to do that, it's like a rare pleasure because I grew up again. I took home lessons till I was 14, and then I'm self-taught since. And all of this self-discovery comes from curiosity, comes from creativity and the what if and how could I, and I got to find somebody, and all of the things that keep us going. Right. And so you were a huge part of helping me to take my inspiration and turn it into actual, real, an evolution of my music. So thank you for that. But also, I can't wait for people to hear all the work we've done because I'm proud of it. It really came out great.
A lot of great stuff there, man. Yeah.
And then
I'm super excited.
And then we'll have the live shows coming out. We've already done one last year, but this next show that's coming out is going to be of the actual parts that we recorded. So. Right. Very exciting stuff. Jacob, I'm so glad to have this conversation with you. I've been waiting to do this for a long time, and I so appreciate your time and
what a pleasure,
knowledge.
Man.
Yes, we could do it again sometime and have a completely separate discussion on all sorts of things, I'm sure. But where would people find some of your recorded music if they were looking for it?
Yeah, the best place to go is to my YouTube page. It's just my name. Jacob Szekely, Szekely, and I tend to usually release almost all of my music exclusively on YouTube if they're my projects or my personal projects. I also have things on Spotify as well, under my name, under some of my groups, Jacob Szekely Trio, Quarteto Nuevo, and of course I'm sure you can look up my name and all the different artists that I play and record with, which I do quite a bit of. So tremendous.
Well, thank you, and I can't wait till the next show when we do it all again.
Cannot wait. Thanks for having me, man.
Thank you. Stay tight, and I'll see you soon.